Okay, hello and welcome to our first session of Sustainability in the Art Studio. I'm really grateful to Patricia Watts through ecoartspace, just having access to run this course. I think this is the seventh time we've run it. And every time we do, we have different guest artists come in and speak from ecoartspace. And I'm always amazed at um, I think just the level of professionalism and practice of all of the participants that come through as students that I've worked with. It's always an honor, and I feel like I'm equally learning from all of you. So I'm just really grateful to be working with all of you. I'm going to start by introducing a little bit about myself and my practice. And then I would love to do some quick introductions to hear a little bit about who you are, what's feeling alive for you right now, a couple of sentences about your practice and what you're hoping to get through this class. And then we'll dive into a slideshow where I'm going to just sort of talk about some frameworks and concepts that I would really love us to ground in this course. Um, and then next week, we're going to talk about materials like processes. How do you wildcraft materials? And then in the third week, we're going to talk about grounding our practice in community and place. And so we'll have two guest artists. I think Koyo is next week, and then Nicole is the third week. And then, as you guys have probably noticed, we have a break between our third and our fourth class, and similarly between our fourth and our fifth class. And that's to give you guys time to work on and create your own projects that are informed by some of the concepts or materials that we're talking about. And they could be projects that you already have in play and you want to deepen in and really focus and hone in on. And in our last class, what I have been doing for the last seven sessions is we open up your project presentations to the wider eco art space community. And it's always been really generative to have other people sort of observe and see what you've been working on. But just to say, if anybody feels uncomfortable with that, we can easily navigate just keeping your presentation among the class by just offsetting like the start time of the later presentation. So no pressure. Okay, so I'm going to begin by sharing my screen. So I wanted to just share a little bit about my practice because I think it's important to know when you're learning from somebody what their background is and their perspectives are. Um, so my practice sort of lies at the intersection of art, community practice, education, and ecology. And I've been an artist my whole life. But I really started coming into community practice and eco art practices after becoming rapidly disillusioned by the art world. I studied painting at the Rhode Island School of Design, and then I lived in New York City and worked under various artists for 6 years. And while I was there, I was my best friend was getting his doctorate at Columbia University's Teachers College in art education. And I started hanging out with these incredible educators from all these different backgrounds. And I think that's where I realized the power of education and art as a tool for community practice. So I went into the a Master's of Art Education program at the Art Institute of Chicago, and the course that I'm teaching you right now is sort of the culmination of my thesis work. Um, and after that, I said, okay, now that I've learned like social theory and ethics and pedagogy, I'm ready to make art. So I literally Googled free MFA programs and I found one that I recommend to anybody who is on a tight budget. I went to UMass Amherst where they offer a full ride and you get paid to teach undergrad and you get amazing health insurance. So that was what I did the last 3 years. And right now I'm in Cleveland teaching at a couple local colleges, but this is body of work is the work that I've done the last 2 years, and it was all derived with black walnut ink that I was making from the trees outside of my studio. And I also started really deepening research around here's a little bit about the black walnut process, which we'll talk more about in the next session. But around this time, I also started recognizing that how critical it was to ground my practice in community. And so I started researching women's relationship to labor and craft, and that was sort of how I started integrating fibers into my practice. And my collaborator, Karan, and I designed and built this community loom. We've had over 600 people weave on it at this point in 5 locations, and it's just been a really powerful tool for like somatically grounding people in the collective and in community, and just like the conversations that happen are so powerful. And I came up with this idea because I was also running a creative storytelling collective for a couple of years, where people would just come and share a story once a month. And I wanted to build a huge loom, like the size of a room, that would be collectively woven. The piece would be called Common Ground, and we would all just sit on that rug for these collective gatherings. So, all this just to say that I have an independent art practice, a collective art practice, and an art education practice. So, I have found that for me, like what is sustainable in my practice, it bleeds and it necessarily has to sort of play into those three like dynamics or modalities. Whoops. And then I wanted to share a little bit about the course that I'm teaching you. Like, where did a lot of this content come from? So, as I mentioned, most of my thesis research went into developing this course, but the original framework for it was devised by Yvonne Asin, who I met, who was also getting a doctorate at Columbia Teachers College when I was hanging out there, and he created this nonprofit called Center for Art Education Sustainability, and so I started collaborating with him to develop this course, and I'm going to show you now. So this is our class Google Doc, um, and it's divided by session. So there's the dates and times, the sort of what part of what we're covering in that class, and then homework and extended reading. These are all optional. Um, but I'm bringing Yvonne up because in here, and this is it's entirely up to you guys how deep you want to go in your research with this course or how surface you want to keep it. We all have different capacities, right? And it's designed to be a flexible course to meet you where you're at. But if, for those of you who do want to go deep and really get into the weeds here, there are links here for the original framework and research that Yvonne put together for this course, so you can read sort of the a little like he really goes into the historical background and function of art in the Western canon. And yeah, he talks about sustainability as a concept. And then and next week we'll get into this. But he's also done some great work collecting a lot of resources for different processes. A lot of these are dated, I will say. But the kind of cool thing about wildcrafting art materials is we are trying to resurrect very old processes that human beings have been doing for all of like human history often. So they are still reliable for the most part. Um, So in this Google Doc, I have optional readings for each week. And we hopefully you've had the chance to read these readings by Hilary Ingwood and Susie Goblick, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And there are more optional readings that have informed this course, the development of this course. I'm a little bit of a like an education-aholic. Like I love learning. And every time I've been in grad school for the last 5 years doing two different master's programs. And every semester I just do a lot of legwork in like researching what professors are in the school that are teaching courses that are really interesting to me. So I'll audit a lot of classes and I'll collect all of those resources and I put them all into this folder of folders. So for any of you who want to go deep into certain topics, there are some many more readings here. And I welcome you to also contribute to this because this is something that I share with past, present, and future students. Um, okay, so I'd love to pause there and just go through some introductions and hear, yeah, so the invitation is your name, your pronouns. I use she, her. Where are you based? I'm in the Midwest, currently in Cleveland, Ohio. And anything you want to share? I mean, a couple like prompt questions might be what's feeling alive for you right now? What do you want to get out of this course? What are you like sort of curious to learn more about? Or what does your current practice look like? Um, so yeah, and we can just do popcorn style. Anybody can hop on the mic.
I can start. My name is Devin Horton. My pronouns are she, hers, and I am in Northern Kentucky, literally right across the river from Cincinnati. So it's kind of this weird division line here. Kind of like the South and the Midwest mixed. But right now, I am currently experimenting a lot with botanical dyes and homemade walnut inks. And of course, it's walnut season, so that's quite literally what I'm doing right now in my studio practice. But I came from a very traditional oil painter background, and I made a lot of work about the environment. So that obviously triggered a lot of thinking about my studio practice. So that's kind of where I am right now. I'm really excited to be here.
I'll go next. Hi, my name is Colette. I live on Lake Granbury in North Texas. I'm about 45 minutes southwest of Fort Worth. So I've been here about a year and a half, and it's a big shift for me living from an urban environment for many years into a more rural environment. I was a university and college professor for 25 years. This is the first semester. I'm not teaching and just focusing on my work. So that's exciting. I've also write about art and artists, and have been doing so for 25 or more years. And I joined Eco Art Space about a year ago. I somehow saw it was a call for the book club that they did, which was titled Literature as Resistance. And so that really piqued my interest. Um, and I joined Patricia for two retreat style workshops. One was in August, and that was in Cerrillos, New Mexico, on an organic farm, and we worked with an artist learning how to make Adobe bricks, and then we did an Adobe collaborative sculptures using the Adobe bricks that we made that were infused with seeds. So once those return to the earth, new growth will occur. We also did learn to make some solar plant dyes from some of the and did some printmaking on fabric from some of the local plants that were on the farm. And then most recently, I just got back from last weekend. We did a sound art residency in on the Pecos River in New Mexico. So I asked Patricia if this workshop was or course was appropriate for me because I'm primarily a media-based artist. I do not draw and I do not paint. I do make printmaking from time to time, but I don't have access to a press at this time. So a lot of my work is dealing with I have a long-term sound art project, um, recording voices in Texas that have historically been silenced, specifically female, non-binary, and queer voices. And then I also do performance art. So since I've moved to Granbury, I've been doing more eco performance and responding to the land and also kind of reframing how I approach performance to um, performing with other than humans. So, that the land is my co-performer and all the living beings in the land are also co-performing with me. And yeah, so I'm here to learn how to make my practice more sustainable.
I'll go because something Colette just said is a good transition. I love what you were saying about co-performing with non-humans. And so I have a new arts organization called Soon Is Now, but we've actually been doing this annual happening public art event for 5 years. This is our fifth year. And we're here. I'm actually on the site now where I'm in Beacon, New York, on the Hudson River. And the site where we do our work is this really interesting site that was once an industrial site, a railroad industry site where there was a lot of dumping of their material, a lot of toxicity from those materials leached into the ground and the water. And many years later, this area was remediated and turned into this climate resilient ecological landscape. So there's a lot of history, plus we're in Beacon where Pete Seeger lived, and it's kind of ground zero for environmentalism in the country. So the works are throughout the landscape and they're interacting with non-humans. So that's part of what makes the festival so interesting. So we take audiences on a tour, and all kinds of artists are interacting and creating works in response to different sites here. And as far as my own work, I guess this has kind of been my practice for the past 5 years. I haven't been in the studio per se. I found one of those articles really interesting, that idea of the individual and taking us away from the idea of the individual. So I'm not an individual anymore in my studio working. I'm working with all these artists and thinking about ways we can engage with climate change and our fragile ecosystems and everything interrelated. So, but it's interesting. I signed up for the class because I thought, well, I do want to get back in the studio and be an individual a little bit.
Mm.
But my practice has some challenges because I'm a photographer and a filmmaker. So this is something I'm questioning and interested in, is like alternative materials for those mediums.
There are ways. I have not done them myself, but I have had many students who are photographers who have introduced me to a number of approaches to sustainable photography that I'll share with you. Um, I also had a quick question. Was the river remediated before you guys arrived, or were you part of the advocacy process for the remediation?
Well, the river itself is, you might know, is hugely problematic. That was Seeger's whole
Mm.
fight here. So it's filled with PCBs from General Electric that dumped in the water, and they're still there. There's been a lot of cleanup, but they're very, they stay there. So it's still a huge problem. We have other industrial challenges here too, nuclear and etc. So, but the actual park, the ground, the earth here
Mhm.
was remediated prior to this project that I started. Yes.
Are you familiar with Lauren Bond's Metabolic Studio project in LA?
That sounds really familiar.
Should check that out.
Okay, I will.
I wrote in the chat.
Thank you.
I can go next. My name is Navjeet. My pronouns are she, her, and um, I'm currently an MFA student at U of M. Um, and I'm taking this course because I'm really interested in I saw that Koyo was going to be a guest on it, and I'm really interested in learning from Koya because I'm building sound sculptures right now. My practice has been about how we care for the land water elements and how that shows up in our bodies. So embodied practices is something that I'm really interested in my work. And I also base my practice on familial memory and land loss and displacement. So all of that kind of shows up for me in my work.
Hi, I'm Joanna, pronouns she, her. I'm from Montreal, Canada, and I've been just trying for the past years. I also started as an oil painter, and for the past years, I have been trying to kind of match the themes of my work with the mediums that I use. So I've transitioned to more textiles and biocomposites, bioplastics with agar, and plant dyes, a lot of botanical dyes for textiles. And I'm really eager for this class to just meet other people and other practices. Sometimes it can feel kind of isolating to aim to diminish the impact that we have in the art world. And so, yeah, I think this is what I'm most excited about in the class, to meet everyone, to see their practices, and to kind of create this little community.
Hi, I'm Anna O'Keefe, pronouns she, her. Um, I'm been an art teacher for the past 15 years, mostly high school and now middle school. I live in Kingston, New York, so also in the Hudson Valley. But I've traveled quite a bit, so I've only been here for the past 4 years. But in my studio practice, I was mostly a community muralist for a long time. I started in the city, in New York City, and then a little bit abroad in Guatemala and Honduras. And now I find myself back in New York, where I was originally from, Albany. But I'm excited about this course. I also met Koyo recently at Unison Arts, and I saw an event there and realized that she lives very close to me. And then when she posted about this course, I signed on. I've been in the past few years really trying to figure out ways to make the art classroom more sustainable. I keep feeling like as years go on, I'm buying so many materials and wasting so many supplies with kids. And so I'm always really curious to show them artists that are working with eco materials. And we have an Earth Art event. And so that's kind of what I'm most excited for, is really researching and figuring out ways to make an art classroom more sustainable. Uh, yeah,
Is it Anna or Anna?
Anna.
Anna, same for me. My friend Mike put together the whole thing, Wild Clay at Unison, which is also where I met Koyo. And I also wanted to share my good friend who was the one who I was connected to at Columbia Teachers College, started this project called Artolution. This is his doctorate project, and it's a project where they do community-based murals around the world in areas of crisis predominantly. So there's like a deeply informed like trauma approach to it. And like working with and training artists on the ground in those communities to facilitate the projects. But it's a really cool framework and they have just so many amazing projects. So I just sent you a link in the chat if you want to check it out.
Yeah.
I can go. I'm Erica Nur, and I actually am living in Northampton, Massachusetts, near UMass. And I uh, have been here for a long time. I originally went to grad school in New York City, and I was in New York for 20 years, and then moved up here. I currently like bought a place here locally and I'm setting up a new studio. So this is like really it's good timing that way. I consider myself a painter, although I've done a lot of installation and some sculpture and performance as well. But I'm just starting um, on an installation um, in it's with Fung Collaboratives in Redwood City. It's called the Art Kiosk. And so I'm just starting on that installation, and I'm kind of wanting to use the class to um, develop that project and um, be in community with people. I am feeling a little bit isolated at times, and just to be able to see what everyone else is working on. Um, I have worked a lot with like natural powdered pigments and making my own paints and uh, I did have maybe a 5 year stint in there where I kind of was not making work, but I had started a solar company with my ex now, but I was really involved, and not so much directly in the arts, but um, installing solar panels. And I got, and I'm kind of now wanting, I'm coming back to my own practice again and kind of just wanting to incorporate sustainable practices in my work again. So
Okay, can I go next? I'm Nina. I am speaking from Toronto. I just came here about 2 months ago to start my PhD program in media design innovation. Um, so my background is more into watercolor, but in my master degree in in the United States, I shift to more metalwork and jewelry making, sort of manipulating the idea of gender norms. It was one. And then so now in my PhD, I feel more left behind. I mean, because I don't have studio anymore. I'm just reading and, learning and writing sort of in my second language. So now my project is sort of emphasizing on the social and participatory process. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing correctly, but sort of more social practice of making art rather than just the end of result. I mean, the finished work as an art object. I prefer to have more shared experience, story, and sort of action. And now I do I grab more from queer and feminist theory in action for having sort of art that can provide more community space, and I'm thinking about public art as a place to occupy sort of. um, And yeah, the other reason is like in PhD we don't have that much artists around, and I felt like, oh my God, I felt so isolated. I need to have a community of artists to talk and learn, and also practicing for my teaching for future. It's my dream job. And then yeah, I think that's the point.
Awesome. Thank you all so much for sharing. I feel very grateful to be in community with you. And I do feel like this is a collective, it's a community that builds. So, yeah, I'm always like, that's my favorite part about the class. And that's why I started teaching because I like just, it's just a container to be in dialogue with people. Okay, so I'm gonna run through some concepts that have been really grounding in my practice. And yeah, I think I suspect that they'll also not be so new for some of you, perhaps. But here we go. Okay. So this is a chart we're going to revisit in our third session when we talk about partnerships and alliances. But I just wanted to plant the seed now for you guys to start considering how your work as an artist or an educator or a community art facilitator is engaging with these wider circles of community, society, environment. And you might have a practice that's like really just in dialogue between the self and the environment or the self and society. Um, but I just wanted us to uh, think about, yeah, how our work is entangled with these wider circles, right? Okay. So, what is sustainability? Uh, so this next slide that I'm going to put up is the most commonly referred to definition that is collected from the United Nations Assembly. Um, and yeah, I wonder like so we can read it first. So sustainability means meeting our own needs without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. And I just wonder how this is sitting with you guys. Would you make any adjustments to this definition? How do we feel about it?
I think it's a little too focused on the self. Um,
Yeah, I would agree. I would agree. I would agree. It's a little anthropocentric. So for anybody who isn't familiar with that term, anthro is like human centric, centered. You probably also have heard the term Anthropocene. Geologists sort of like speculate and propose that we are in an era called the Anthropocene. So like the era in which humans have fundamentally changed the terrain of the earth. Um, so yeah, I would propose that we need to think of sustainability in a more holistic way as connected to the social, the economic, the cultural, and so critically, the non-human, right? So how and when did we start thinking about sustainability? It's so important to note that many indigenous cultures have lived within their means and continue to today where possible. The concept of sustainability is a more recent development responding to the rise of unsustainable practices amidst human growth population, largely as a result of colonialism and fossil fuel capitalism, resulting in the loss of biodiversity and destabilizing climate. And I think just to touch on this briefly, I think that's also why it's so important too in this conversation around like the Anthropocene. There's a lot of academics and theorists who are pushing back on that concept and like wanting us to reframe our language there, and thinking about it as like the Capitalocene, or I mean Donna Haraway would talk about like the Cthulhu scene, but just like understanding that when we say we're in the Anthropocene, like humans have fundamentally shifted the terrain of the earth. It's not all humans. It's just I want us to recognize like there's a very deep history that is like uh, really at the hands of colonialism and capitalism and fossil fuel capitalism that have led us down this direction. And it's not necessarily like I think it's easy to get into like self-hatred, like anti-humanism, when we think about it in these lenses. But I think it's important to recognize that it's not all humans, it's not all human nature. It's like a very particular approach to things that has led us down this dark path. So yeah, I just wanted to speak briefly to that. Okay, so I want to talk about the historical background and function of art. And I want to say this with the what's the word I'm looking for? Well, this is the story that I have put together, okay? There's so many different ways to tell this story, and there's so many different perspectives to tell this story through. So I just want to name that I'm like sort of picking a few like highlights to sort of tell and understand like how we got here, okay? Um, so, and if you don't know where to start in terms of sustainable practice, looking back through history can help. Two eras before industrialization. So art materials throughout history reflect a culture's relationship to their respective landscape and access to materials. Every culture and civilization before the Industrial Revolution and globalization developed art processes in relation to their climate, generally using local materials. Here are two examples of cave paintings from 10 to 20,000 years ago in northern Spain and Argentina. They're evidence that our species has been exploring painting processes for at least tens of thousands of years. It's only recently that we have become so removed from the processes of making our own art materials. We go to a store and buy supplies. Zooming out chronologically in the history of man, this is a very recent development. Take a sip of water. So, for example, the Egyptians had an almost unchanged 3,000-year long tradition of watercolor painting on mud plaster walls. And I wanted to show some examples of different like raw earth pigments that have not undergone chemical processes. So these are some of the colors that like derive organically from the land. This is a great documentary I recommend if anybody has Nova. Um, it's like called From A to Z, the first alphabet, and how writing changed the world. They talk about in this documentary, they run through the history of writing and how connected that the history of writing and the spread of communication is to our relationship to materials. So they talk about how in the Middle East there was the use of papyrus, which is a highly accessible, easy to process, easy to create writing surface, and it made writing on it was so easy. It was very cost like it didn't cost much to produce, didn't involve too much labor, so information spread rapidly, and the civilization grew rapidly and was like knowledge grew so fast. Whereas in European lineage, there was they were not they didn't have access to like papyrus or in like China they would use like rice paper. In Europe they were using hide pigment parchment like animal hide, which is so costly to produce, so labor intensive, and it's also a lot harder to write on. So information spread a lot slower at this time, and it was really only like sort of relegated to like the upper classes. So anyways, it's a fascinating documentary. I do recommend if you have access to it. So, in the Western canon of art history, some of the oldest written accounts of art materials and techniques come from the first century classical Greece through Pliny and Vitruvius. Artists in the Western canon have long referred to their writings to reclaim old world techniques. Today, we have access to the World Wide Web, which makes it easy to find recipes for a specific medium or craft. But sometimes these recipes are not so well researched, at least compared to what you might find in some of these old texts. And they're often very place-based, which in these old texts they are as well. But it's just like things to keep in mind. Uh, Perhaps the most significant documentation of art processes came at the turn of the 15th century with the book El Libro dell'Arte. I'm sorry if I'm butchering that, by Cennino Cennini. It's a 189 chapter book that has been the main reference for understanding the chemistry and reasoning behind the art processes of medieval artists. Similarly, Giorgio Vasari documented essential painting processes and materials used by the Italian masters during the Renaissance. So, designing for expediency. So, throughout the Renaissance, art and science walked together for centuries. They were very entangled in their pursuits. Artists largely produced their own materials throughout that time up until we reached that sort of era of industrialization and globalization. Artists began to lose knowledge of what goes into art materials and the properties that define their qualities. The production of oil paint tubes eventually allowed Impressionists to paint nature from observation in faster ways, right? So there are obviously some benefits here. But art began to move towards abstract ideas, conceptuality, and aesthetic values, often emphasizing individualism, which is something we're going to talk more about. So here's some examples of synthetically altered pigments, right? This is how we get those like rich, hot colors that are so indicative of the modern era. Got our like hot blues, cadmiums. And, here's just some beautiful paintings by Impressionists where they like brought those tubes with them out into the field. And like Van Gogh, you just carry all his materials with him on his back and he would go out there and he could paint. Like, I mean, he had the ability to do that because of the advancements of producing art materials like in this era, right? Okay, so I want to touch upon legacies of anthropocentric miseducation. What cultural ideologies are we on the receiving end of? How has this shaped our understanding of nature, art, and the ways we relate to each other and to the non-human world? So circling back to, oh wait, actually, no, I'm going to read this in a little bit. I want to start in chronologically. So Ptolemy's geocentric model, so this is sort of circa 150 AD in the European canon. In astronomy, the geocentric model, also known as geocentrism, often exemplified specifically by Ptolemaic system, sorry if I'm saying that wrong, describes the universe with Earth at its center. This is how European ancient civilizations understood their place in the universe. Heliocentrism, which is where the Earth and the planets revolve around the sun, later became a major blow to religious teachings that claim the opposite. So circling back to the Renaissance, depicted here is the School of Athens by Raphael. This work demonstrates a very human-centered way of being and relating to the world. In this painting, we see that man is at the heart of Western classical representation. Man is a cultural animal. He's centered here. The greatness of nature is diminished and replaced by the beauty of rationality, governability, and purity amidst classical architecture. And here we have the great chain of being. Has anybody heard this concept before? Yeah. This goes deep. This is a deep cut. So the Great Chain of Being was a hierarchical view of the universe that was a prominent concept in Western thought during the ancient Greek period, particularly through Neoplatonism, reaching full expression in the European Renaissance through the 18th centuries. So essentially what this philosophy is saying here is that the chain begins with God, descends through angels, humans, animals, plants, and minerals. So everything underneath man is subservient to man, right? So that's where like animals, plants, minerals, we start to justify our domain over those entities, right? Uh, The concept of humanism as a major intellectual movement emerged in the late 14th century Italy and matured in the 15th century and spread across Europe by the mid 16th century. Uh, Renaissance humanism is tied to Christianity. It's the belief that everything around us is being created by God for us, deliberately sidelining nature as imperfect in comparison to the perfection of man, considering human beings as the starting point for a serious moral and philosophical inquiry. There's an emphasis on education, reason, individualism, and a strong belief in the universal human nature. I'm sorry if you hear my donkey braying right now. She's not in pain. It's what they do. It's normal. So there's a differentiation between us and nature that is being theorized here, right? And I'm going through this history because it's so important to understand that these are the legacies of thought and ways of being and relating to the world that we are on the receiving end of, right? So humanism is a key factor, was a key factor in the rise of individualism, particularly during the Renaissance, shifting focus from the religious and the collective view towards human potential, achievement, and dignity. So there's an emphasis on intrinsic worth of the individual, promoting the realization of one's goals and desires, valuing independence and self-reliance, and advocating that the interests of the individual should gain precedence over the state or a social group. Uh, and from there, I'm going to bring us into this concept of post-humanism. So post-humanism sort of begins to replace humanism with the idea of interconnectedness, new concepts of network systems, maybe systems theory, predominantly a discourse developed in Western and white-centric cultural realities as a way to sort of reconcile with this past that I've just been talking about. But it's so important to ask alongside this concept of post-humanism or new materialism. What about ontological perspectives, like ways of thinking, outside of the Western canon that have long discentered the human, right? So, for example, indigenous frameworks in North America and globally, and even within the Western canon, like pre-Christian Roman frameworks, like your Celtic, Norse, pagan, you just sometimes you have to go pretty deep back. Um, so. I wanted to talk about this concept of beyond moving beyond the canon. So, what cultural ideologies are we on the receiving end of? How has progress and individualism shaped our understanding of nature, art, and the ways we relate to each other and the non-human world? The history of art as is commonly studied in Western art institutions, has consisted predominantly of white male artists. However, in the era of Black, Indigenous, disability, queer, and eco-activism, the historically exclusive canon of art is being critically reevaluated. This is happening presently, of course, but I mean, obviously, we're seeing some really extreme cultural rollbacks right now, and not just in the West and in America, but like kind of on a global scale. But I think that that's sort of a reaction to this sort of progressive questioning of things. And anyways, we could have a wider conversation about that. So I love this concept of the pluriverse or the pluriversal, like multiple universes coexisting simultaneously. A world in which diverse hopes can be sown, multiple opportunities can be cultivated, and a plurality of meaningful lives can be achieved by the richly different and caring people we are. There are many alternatives to the domineering, profiteering, globalizing, disempowering progress of the West. And sorry, I should have prefaced this by saying this concept of pluriversal is coming from like to say that in the Western canon, right, that's like a universe or like a way or like a story. But simultaneously, throughout that whole journey and continuing to the present and to the future, are whole other universes and worlds and cultures that are and continue to operate, right? So it's sort of this like decentering the like Western canon feels like really important culture work right now. And I love this concept called this or this like yeah talking. So the social turn is a term coined by art historian Claire Bishop, who points to the emerging shift within the art world towards the social sphere. This shift is not necessarily a new art movement, but rather a new social order that emphasizes participation, like we talked about participatory art earlier, challenges power and spans disciplines. The point is not to destroy art, but exercise the capacity for art to blur into the everyday, to participate in life. art might be becoming the new place to learn civics. As the social and political systems in place fail to meet people's needs amidst an encroaching reality of a destabilizing climate, a critical need for self-determined sociality grows. Artists are turning their attention towards community solidarity issues such as food security, clothing, education, and housing. And I will, it is important to recognize too that like I don't mean to like romanticize this because part of the reality that's going on here is that there is not really like government support for art right now. And so it's kind of out of necessity that a lot of artists not only not support for art, but like people's needs, right? So there's like an out of necessity, we are meeting our community's needs and we're like building our own forms of self-determined like sociality among us. So you see a lot of artists like sort of stepping into that role. So I wanted to pause here because before I keep talking solo, for a discussion question around like some of the readings that the two readings that I offered. And even if you didn't read them, that's okay. I would still love to hear some input. So I'll read this slide and then I'll stop sharing just so we can come into this space as a group. So Hillary Inwood and Susie Goblick provide a framework for what transdisciplinary, socio-ecologically engaged art practices can entail. Right, so just to clarify, because I know the way that I talk sometimes can be a little bit like academic heady, but what I mean by transdisciplinary is multiple disciplines, right? We're sort of not just in the realm of art, but maybe like community practice, environmentalism, etc., politics, and then socio-ecologically engaging both the realm of the social sphere and the ecological sphere. Um, so in mapping eco art education, Ingwood proposes that tools such as empathic listening, dialogue, and collaboration are key to establishing a place-based arts pedagogy or practice. Pedagogy is like more so associated with teaching and developing curriculum that takes into consideration the needs, ideologies, values, and socio-political concerns of specific places and communities. And I am going to talk about place-based education later, because I know there's a few of you who are interested in education. Similarly, in connective aesthetics, Susie Goblick proposes seeing and engaging beyond the self, moving beyond individualism, finding a balance between self-assertion and embedded integration. So my question, or like, and you guys could bring up anything you want, but prompt question is, what challenges and growth opportunities do these concepts awaken in regards to your own practice, in regards to culture at large? Anyone can chime in. It might be some ways that you've already exercised some of these concepts, or ways that you want to, or some challenges that these concepts pose to your practice and rethinking your practice.
Yeah, I was happy to see Susie Gablick on the reading list. I've always appreciated her writing. Um, I think I've been dealing with a lot of my practice over maybe the last 4 or 5 years has radically shifted. Um, I've always collaborated, but specifically with this listening or the sound project that I've been working on, it's very much rooted in social practice and in deep listening. And I think for me as an artist, it's really rewarding to have these one-on-one encounters where I'm serving as a facilitator or a witness to provide a safe space for people to access their authentic voice. Um, and so that would be like that's the process, right? And that's what's most meaningful for me. But the audience, I'm going to use audience listeners, people who are coming to the work. Don't have that same sense of being fully present with someone. And the challenge that I'm having, like I've put together a few different handouts for visitors to the galleries or the spaces, like which are tools for deep listening, which is very much grounded in Pauline Oliveiras's work. But it's a big, big ask. Well, first of all, sound art is weird for a lot of people. It's not
Colette, could
like
you just define deep listening, like loosely?
um
Because you may not be familiar.
okay, well, I will define it as Pauline Oliveras, who is a really amazing thinker and sonic artist. She had developed these. I think of them as fluxus scores because my work is grounded in fluxus, but the deep listening. So these are a set of scores, and one of her books is 300, and it's one for every day of the year. And so these scores, which can be practiced individually or ideally in community, are tools to really focus on bringing your listening to a deeper level, right? And I don't, you can jump in
No,
if you
that's
have
great. That was great.
different. I can post the book too. If you all aren't familiar, it's really quite amazing. Um, for me, the challenge has been, for visitors to the gallery space or whatever community space that the work is being exhibited. One is that people are used to seeing things when they go to the art gallery and they're not used to being asked to sit and listen. And uh, so that already that's a big ask, right? And so, I've devised different systems where like set up little mini living rooms in various parts of the space that are comfortable to encourage people to sit in community and listen. But it's still a big challenge because I have found this through, the 25 years of teaching for sure, is that I'm gonna blame, social media, um, that the attention spans are much, much shorter than they used to be. And so people like they're going in a gallery, they want like the quick hit. They're not necessarily don't necessarily want to invest the time. So even though each person's, I call them like little mini symphonies that are edited of each person's soundings, um, you know, they're anywhere from 1 to 3 minutes long. So maybe people listen to one or two and then they get up, right? So yeah, I'm interested. Yeah, I just wanted to say that's my biggest challenge, especially in Texas. It's a shit show here. I mean, with Texas leads the nation in terms of number of proposed legislation to restrict LGBTQ rights. In fact, at the university level, if it's a public university, you can't even say the word trans in the classroom anymore. So it's like, basically you aren't able to acknowledge your students. Um, well, and the abortion ban and making that a criminal offense, there's lots of things. So yeah, I don't want to like dominate, but that's been my biggest challenge is like really getting like how do you get people to sit and listen? And I call it deep listening. You can call it empathetic listening or empathic. I feel like it's the same. That's just semantics. It's the same thing. It's like being able to listen without judgment and just take in.
Yeah. Just a really quick response that's coming up for me is, and I see this trend in art spaces right now is it feels more like experimental art spaces, but like there's this turning towards a ritual. Um, and like sort of honing in on this question of how do we be together? And I think coming back to, I think something that Navjeet touched upon too, and like working around like family, like memory histories that are like embedded in the body, to the question around like how do we regard or hold space for the complex histories that are embedded in our individual selves, like ancestrally when we come together. is like a really important question, I think, in a multicultural context like America today. And I think that the practice of deep listening is so powerful because I think it's a practice that can hold space for that complexity, you know. And it's the kind of practice where it's like you like see it and you're like, what the hell is that? I don't know, like I don't have time for this. But then when you go, it's like so powerful. Like the experience is often so powerful and transformative for the people who actually show up for those kinds of experiences. Anybody else want to share some thoughts?
I think, what was your question again? I'm more just thinking about both your
Yeah, yeah.
articles. I have a lot of
No,
stuff swimming around.
no, that's a great question. So in like looking at some of the examples that Ingwood talked about, like empathic listening, dialogue, collaboration, and Goblik talks about like seeing and moving beyond the self, finding the balance between self-assertion and embedded practice. What challenges and growth opportunities do these concepts awaken in regards to your own practice or in regards to the culture at large from your perspective?
Mhm. Well, I think, maybe like a lot of us, I've been very like disenchanted with the art world in quotes and trying to figure out like how I fit in. And also I'm a climate activist. And that's all kind of how this came together. And I think I was very heartened, reading these articles that, I think sometimes people separate activism from art and they don't understand how art is activism. Like they put us in silos. It's like, okay, well, you're doing that, but like, how is that changing the world or how's that doing anything? Like, you need to be out in the streets, you need to be changing legislation. You need to be, and I do both of those things, but I don't believe that. I believe art is crucially important. For activism and culture change and all of that. But it's interesting. I feel like heading this organization, you're always like put on the defense there. You get asked that question. And how are you going to answer it? And, I just today again, from the mouths of smart people, feeling just really heartened by saying, yes, of course, this is crucially important. Of course, this makes change. Of course, this impacts people. Um, so that's just us.
Definitely because like culture pushes policy change and art inspires culture. Policy doesn't inspire the heart. Art inspires the heart, which inspires people to act and react. And that pushes policy changes.
Thank you.
So important. Yeah.
So
It's an easy
important to move
argument.
the heart. It's in my statement. Yeah, as we're approaching the festival tomorrow, it's interesting because I always also invite environmental groups. So we have all of our performances, our visual art, and then we have our environmental groups. And this is the first year and it's nice. It's a nice interactive thing to have. And this is the first year and I said, "Well, do I need to have the environmental groups? I don't think I need to have the environmental groups here, and I did put out the call and no one was available. So maybe it was all meant to be. Um, because I feel like it's nice, but do I need that to say, yes, this art is activism? Do I need to add that? Um, at the same time, I do think we can work together, the activists and the artists. And I like that idea too. But there
Yeah.
shouldn't be like a divide. Like, here are the environmental groups, sign these petitions, and here's the art pieces.
Yeah.
How can we integrate them in a way that's more thinking creatively? How do we make it about art too? Yeah.
Totally, totally. I threw a book recommendation in the chat that you might find interesting called Earthborn Democracy,
Oh, cool.
where they're talking about what does it really take and look like to step into a new movement that really advocates for and shows up for like addressing the polycrises. Have you guys heard that term before? Like the polycrises is to say that the multiple crises that we're facing, colonialism, imperialism, climate change, racism, like immigration crises, like they're all completely entangled. They're not like separate issues. And so it's like it's an intersectional problem and it needs to be met in with intersectional solutions. I'm such a huge advocate for like cross-disciplinary coalition. I think that that's like so powerful. It's like you need the artist to communicate to people's hearts and you need like policymakers to like articulate legislation shifts and like it's like you need like all of it, you know? And I just think that the more we can recognize that and work together, the more sustainable, like hardy our movements are, you know? And the more powerful and effective they are. Yeah. Anybody have any other comments before we take a bio break?
I was thinking about in my project, I was thinking about mixing craft and activism and build up the idea like craftism
I
as
love
a
that.
way to
Oh, I
resist it.
have heard of craftivism, I
I
think.
think it's not mine. I've heard
Love it.
some, but yeah, I think the idea of the gesture of making, right? And it's so associated with activism. And so I'm from Iran. I just 4 years ago I left Iran, so my brain is not based on Western knowledge, right? I'm thinking about all the memory I carry with myself, and but when I got United States 2 years ago, the idea of like hyper individualism really shocked me because all the school system asking me to be productive and self promote. I mean that's really bothered me because constantly you have to be productive to be considered as an artist. It looks like that. I mean, so I think maybe it's related. That's why I brought up. Thank you.
No, I so appreciate your perspective, Nina. Really. It's so, yeah, I really appreciate just hearing a perspective of somebody coming into the culture from a different background and experiencing this for the first time at a point where you're really developed as a human and you're like, whoa, wait a minute, what's going on here? Yeah. Yeah, the emphasis on the individual too. I had two very close Iranian friends, one of whom I told you about in my program, two women, and it was yeah, I just was so grateful for their perspectives and like working alongside them and like walking through the parts of and the aspects of our culture that are were really difficult. Um, I'm slowly working on curriculum right now for a new course called Moving Towards Solidarity in Art and Environmentalism because that's just like it's like this where this conversation is heading, right? It's like the thing that makes sense. And yeah, I think it's like spirit work too, you know? It's it's like it's so tapped into our sense of humanity, like this work and this these initiatives. Um, we're gonna touch a bit more upon that. I'm gonna like go into some more concepts relating to where what we're starting to touch upon right now. But I wanted to give us a 5 minute bio break. So it's 3:12, so we'll come back at 3:17. Cool. Feel free to grab some tea, whatever you need.
What's a bio break?
Oh, a bio break, like you like your biology. Like I have to go to the bathroom, I have to like drink some tea, like whatever you need.
Thank you. That's the first time I heard that word.
Oh yeah.
Maybe
This is from schooling during the pandemic.
say I'm not in academia. I'm not a teacher, so
No, that's great. I love that for
thank
you.
you. Thank you.
Bye. Okay. A couple books I wanted to point out. There's so many books to point out. There's so many amazing readings around these topics we've been touching upon. For those who have the time and the capacity to read, I do recommend checking out the folder of folders I showed earlier, where there's a lot of essays. And I loved reading this book, Decolonizing Nature, Contemporary Art and the Politics of Ecology by TJ Demos. I think this is a great book to look at and thinking about the intersection of art and activism, um, where he's really touching upon really the intersection of art, ecology, and social justice, and like highlights a few projects that really touch upon and integrate those three realms. And he points to the failure to recognize and address the intersection of the social, the political, and the ecological in environmental art. There's a whole history too, I think it's worth mentioning, of like sometimes subtle, sometimes overt racism within the history of environmentalism and the environmental movement in the United States. Um, I'll touch upon that a little bit in a minute. Okay, yeah, I wanted to touch upon some. Oh, there's another. Why isn't this loading? Let's see, okay, here we go. This is also a great book. That my mentor and dear friend Susan Jehoda created with her collaborator Carolyn Woolard. And it's open access. You can get it online for free. And it's all available digitally, I believe. But it's a guide to embodiment, collaboration, and circulation within the visual arts. It's a great handbook for educators too in the arts. Okay, so I wanted to move through a few more key terms and concepts that are good to have on your radar. First of all, really important concepts to understand is environmental justice and environmental racism. So, environmental justice is a social movement that focuses on the fair distribution of environmental benefits and burdens. An interdisciplinary body of science literature, a social science literature that includes theories of the environment and justice, environmental laws and their implementations, environmental policy and planning, and governance for development and sustainability and political ecology. I did take a class specifically about environmental justice at the Art Institute of Chicago with this environmental, I can't believe I'm forgetting their name, like essentially somebody who works with environmental law. And I have uploaded a lot of those readings into the Google Drive. Environmental racism is the exclusion of people of color from policy-making decisions, the deliberate targeting of these communities for toxic waste disposal, and the official sanctioning of life-threatening poisons and pollutants. And I'm touching upon this because I think it's so important to recognize in like going down the path of like eco art practices that it's like it's a deep privilege to be able to do that, to have the time and space to do that, to have the access to land to do that. And there's so many like uh for example, like I collaborate or I work with sometimes a indigenous artist who was recently speaking to the fact that a lot of indigenous peoples don't have like the opportunity to practice their lineages practices that connect people to place through like land-based practices because they're just trying to survive, right? Um, so first of all, yeah, I just want to say it is a privilege. Second of all, that in the States, like there's so many sites that are just intensely polluted and they're sort of by design located in poor communities where they don't have the like access to policymaking decisions. And so yeah, I think it's just really important to like recognize in connecting with environment in the environment that like the people and the social aspect to that is such a critical part of that equation and that work. So this concept, ecological knowledge, is a lived process of knowing that has. So I'm just I'm going to continue running through some more concepts. So that's the jump. Ecological knowledge is a lived process of knowing that has extraordinary ramifications for individuals and communities in terms of what is important, what struggles people engage in, and how the earth is manifest in their values, sense of identity, and culture. So, on a community level, this might look like making connections built upon existing networks or publicly assessing unmet community needs, which involves listening, right, to the community, and shedding light on community offerings. So perhaps creating like doing asset mapping. I don't know if anybody's ever heard of that, where you like map the assets that community members have. And you kind of like can create like a web of like these are all the assets that like our community has to offer. And this is something I'm really interested in exploring actually in Cleveland is like community asset mapping, which is a great bridge to mutual aid and like mutual aid networks and building out mutual aid networks. On an ecological level, ecological knowledge might look like shedding light on the history and health of our non-human environment. So like doing the research around what is the history of industry in this place? What's the history of like uh, what communities came and lived here and like how that was broken up and um, how has the also like in non-human interventions in the ecological realm like what kind of geological shifts happen here that like set the stage for a certain type of soil or rock that like takes place here. I wonder has anybody heard of this concept bioregionalism? So can you guys hear my donkey? You can't? Wow. Okay, that's great. The sound of a donkey was used for the sound of the T-Rex in Jurassic Park. It's like a very visceral sound, but donkeys can hear each other miles away. So that's sort of part of why they're designed to be so loud. So, anyways, bioregionalism. If you don't know where you are, you don't know who you are. Bioregionalism addresses the interplay between the individual, the community, and the environment. On an individual level, the hope is to expand one's ecological cultural identity in a way that feeds back into the health and well-being of their community and environment. Place-based education, while it's not something that we're specifically addressing in this class, my hope is that in the process you'll begin to research and learn more about your bioregional history, ecology, and culture, developing a stronger relationship between person and place. In place-based education, this is the work of like cultivating connections between schools, the community, and the environment through culture studies, nature studies, real-world problem solving, micro enterprises, and community regeneration. And these are all things that can be integrated into an arts-based classroom as well. So diving into this a little bit deeper, place-based curriculum might include content that is specific to the geography, ecology, sociology, politics, and art of your region. Instructional practices that incite student initiative and responsibility. Engaging the talent and expertise of adults outside of the school in your local community, like bringing them in. I think that like intergenerational learning is it's such a powerful way to ground humans in culture and like connecting youth with elders in their community who like can show that examples of like what they could grow into, what kind of practices they could grow into. And it can often lead to informal or formal apprenticeships too and mentorships, you know? Building on real life experience, not abstraction, multidisciplinary, experiential, and participatory, and expanding one's ecological cultural identity. And I think one I forgot to add here is that micro enterprises, like kids starting to, you know, learn how to make honey from bees or like, just like, or make, their own soap bars or whatever. And then learning how they can create and be assets to their own community by like providing creative projects that they're doing. That can be just so empowering for youth. Uh, Cultural sustainability. I really love this term. Maintaining the main cultural sustainability is the maintaining of cultural beliefs, cultural practices, heritage conservation, culture as its own entity, and attempts to answer the question of whether or not any given cultures will exist in the context of the future. Um, this is obviously complex in a multicultural environment, and I think that that's not, I don't see that as um, I don't see that as something that's like holds you back from embracing cultural sustainability. I think it's rather something that like can allow you to thrive in a very sort of biodiverse way. Like if you're in a community with like multiple cultural lineages, like what do you have to share and teach each other? And like what happens when you bring those practices together in a group, right? Integral transformative learning. I was so into this when I was studying education. So integral transformative learning is a an approach to education wherein all human dimensions, body, vital, heart, mind, and consciousness are invited to co-creatively participate in the unfolding of learning and inquiry. So this might entail deep, constructive, and meaningful learning that supports critical ways in which learners consciously make meaning of their lives. I think so. I have a background in the healing arts. So whenever I'm in a teaching role, I'm not taking on the role of a healer, but I'm inviting people to really check in with themselves, like their whole selves, like what's going on in their heart right now, that not just like their mind and their body. And we all store so many stories within us. We're all coming to the table with so many different backgrounds. And I think just really holding space for the in integral learning is like really like approaching education from an understanding that we are whole complex beings and um we're like I not to get too like woo, but it's like soul work, um, so composting is I'm inspired by the process of composting wherein old food scraps are transformed, rearranged, and renewed into rich new soil. This is a great metaphor for how we might not only be with, but thrive under the circumstances of limitation, transitioning out of ways that no longer serve us or our community or our environment. Composting has been pretty central to a lot of my practices within education, my own personal art practice, and community art practices. My thesis, sort of thesis project for my social theory course was around this concept of composting whiteness. And like the subtext of that was moving from individual purity salvation towards collective entangled liberation. Um, but there's whiteness is a topic that I would be happy to go speak more about at length if anybody wants to like talk about that personally. I won't like blow up too much space in this class for that topic, but it's also very connected to everything we've been talking about. And then like so this concept of transformative criticism has also been integral to my approach, which is a restructuring of and rupture with old ways uh, to set the stage for new emergent ways. And this is why I sort of ran through that whole history of like what stories are we on the receiving end of? Because we're doing that culture work of redefining on what terms we want to be in and relate to the world, right? So transformative criticism is defined by Edmund O'Sullivan, who's an education theorist, as a form of criticism that calls into question the fundamental mythos of the dominant cultural form and indicates that the culture can no longer viably maintain its continuity and vision. maintaining that the dominant culture is no longer formatively appropriate. So I think we're all probably recognizing and seeing some of this right now. And I put Spirit Project on here. Necessary adaptations to inherited means of being in the world that a culture or society must take up for psychosocial well-being. The way I see it, we're doing the spirit work of many generations past, right? So this is like a very um, important time to be doing this work, and it's nothing light. And I think we have to give ourselves a lot of grace and self-love. And yeah, I have a practice of connecting with my deep time ancestors and my recent ancestors, and like kind of channeling their strength and resilience too, and like times where I need it, and also doing some deep healing work for like the traumas in that history too, and like using your benevolent ancestors to guide your wounded ancestors and through that process. And anyway, so there's like ancestral healing work, there's collective present healing work, and there's also like land healing work, right? There's like the land is so traumatized, the people, the animals, like so it's just a lot, you know. We have to have be able to resource ourselves in doing this work. Circular systems. So when it comes to setting up your studio and or creating lesson plans, how can we build circular systems? On a material level, we might consider wildcrafting, recycling, upcycling. On a curricular or conceptual level, we might consider how one life cycle of an art project might organically lead into the life cycle of another art project. So materials and even concepts aren't going to waste, but to continue in a cycle, building upon each other. This takes planning, which we're going to come back to in our third class on relationships and alliances. This is also something that's discussed at length in this Making and Being book. Okay, so yeah, this is actually from that Making and Being book. So we make, we use, we return, right? What does that return cycle look like? And that was sort of what I was just touching upon. It might be like we're using some of the materials from an art project to generate a new project. It might look like responsibly redistributing that work into the community. Maybe it's of use or help. Um, and you know, if you're taking it apart or like throwing it out, like doing that responsibly, right? Um, and yeah, Susan and Caroline created this like graph where we have like, let me move this screen here. So moving from production into exchange, like gift bartering, into use, into surplus, composting, and then like back towards the cycle of production. The local and the global. It's important to be present with, sorry, I'm gonna just move this. Come on, there we go. It's important to be present with the global problems we're facing, but it's easy to get paralyzed, as I'm sure we all have experienced at different times. We have to take stock of what we have the agency to change, which often is on a local level, unless, for example, you're managing a major corporation. The more you can contribute to sustainability on a local level, the less reliant you and your community are on larger extractive systems. Now is a great time to identify and support local systems. I will also say something that gave me some hope with this is I was auditing this class called Climate Change, Coloniality, and the Humanities with this incredible humanities professor named Malcolm Sen and the head of the Earth Science Department um, at UMass. And it was this class filled with PhD students from all different backgrounds. So the conversations were like unbelievable in that class. And I just remember this like really critical moment where we kind of came down to the question of like, how are we going to survive this? What is that going to look like? And it was kind of like the conversation kind of reached this dire moment where like we were kind of really like, I don't know, it was a heavy, like very sober look at like where we are at right now with things. And I just remember Malcolm expressing this sense of like radical hope, where it's like, I actually like to think of this as growing flowers in the void. Like even in the face of hopelessness, you move forward with courage of heart and you like grow flowers in the void. That's like my personal practice and approach to the world right now. But Malcolm, I bring this up because Malcolm was saying that he doesn't think that it's going to look like a one like solution fits all thing, which I think a lot of people are searching for. They're like, one solution is going to solve all of our problems, and we just need to figure it out, and we all need to get on the same page about it. And I think he like pushed back and he was like, what it's going to really look like is like local solutions, local communities figuring it out on local levels and like having like all these different local like responses. And like there's no like one size fits all. It's like responsive. And I think that's so appropriate too, because that's like operating on a place-based level, a community-based level, where you're like really tapping into your bioregion, you know? So anyways, I just wanted to share that because that really made an impression. I mean, stuck with me in that conversation. Next, I want to touch upon coordination, the ability to effectively collaborate with others in teams, partnerships, alliances, and remain responsive to evolving conditions. So people often say that artist types can't coordinate. It would be like herding cats. If you dismiss the possibility of coordination in the arts, calling it impractical or impossible, and this again is coming from Making and Being book, quote, we suggest that you attempt to become curious about this sense of impossibility. How might this contradiction be part of a historical debate or struggle about the field of art itself? Could this contradiction between the individual and the collective be generative? And I also want to speak to generative contradictions. I curated a panel discussion on art and social care earlier this year, where it had like several social art practitioners speak to how do we like navigate uh, working collectively. And something that came up that really stuck with me is the idea of like kind of generative conflict. Like, how do we be together in conflict in a generative way? I think that's so important. Being able to be in a collective where not everybody is necessarily fully aligned and has the same vision, but being able to hold different perspectives, right? In a way that doesn't like freak you out and feel like you have to cancel the whole thing or like cancel people. And, you know, there's the whole cancel culture thing where I like to say calling in versus calling out, like calling people in. But he was talking about, Jeff Casper was talking about how um, he has been in collective organizations where like if what this sometimes there's like this for this like okay, we all have to be like here for the same exact ideological reason and like we have to be on the same page. And those groups tend to fall apart, where the groups that have really stuck together and are more resilient are groups that can hold a capacity for people being there for multiple reasons, right? And like so I just think of what does it look like to be of a village, like a village mindedness, being able to like be with diversity of thought, of background. Um, Anyways, this concept, generative contradictions, quote, a point where different forces act on each other and make it possible for us to find new ways of moving forward, of reconfiguring our social and material worlds. So yeah, we're going to touch upon this chart, come back to this chart in our third class, but I just wanted to show it again because I also want to touch upon this concept of visualizing historical consciousness. So, quote, the institutions and social norms we are surrounded by are currently and have historically shaped us. Excuse me. We are both in a historical moment and strongly shaped by the flow of history before us. Really, we are changing both our internal and external worlds simultaneously because this social context has shaped us too. Here's like a graph. So we sort of have your intimate network, community and media, institutions and rules, historical forces, and then sort of what's like holding all of this, like spirit, earth, soul, mystery. Whoops. Are we on time? Okay. Sustainability in the art, sustainable art in the city, so like in urban spheres. Um, and this is like pertaining to art education too in urban spaces. So what systems are in place your urban sphere? So for example, recycling systems, grocery stores. For example, in Chicago, there's a place called the Waste Shed, which is a heavily discounted exchange site for donated art materials. I know there's one in New York City. I think I have a slide about it. We'll see. Creating relationships is much easier in cities or populated areas. You can find people that have similar interests or develop relationships where you can help each other. Are you living in a multicultural area? You may have access to different types of materials that you can learn about from your community or through experimentation. Raw materials in the cities. There's a misconception that raw materials can only be obtained in natural settings, right? This is obviously not true. There's a need for a broader understanding of resources available in urban spheres. Touch upon creating new relationships. Do the resources need to be local? I mean, this is an existential question, right? If you're in an urban sphere and there's like an Indian grocery store next to you, you have access to a whole other range of materials there, right? Um, yeah, so here's some experiments and examples. This is Yvonne teaching like paper making. Paper making so easy. We'll talk about that. Easy thing to do with kids. Like they can blend up their old math papers and create new paper, you know. Locating materials. Here's the New York place I was mentioning. This place is amazing. It's called Materials for the Arts in New York City. A lot of cities have places like this, but they collect surplus materials to distribute to New York City public schools and nonprofits. So teachers can just sort of walk in here and like get what they want. And it's usually so affordable too. Pictured is Yasmani Arbolita's project, the People's Bus, a decommissioned Rikers Island transportation bus, which was transitioned into a mobile community center. Mujeres en Movimiento is the women's group doing the beading with beads donated from materials for the arts. Sustainability, an issue of materials. Let me see, I might actually pause there. Yeah, I do want to pause there. I will touch upon oh wait, why isn't this showing? Okay, yeah. So part of Yvonne's research was looking at like what problems teachers face and trying to work sustainably in the classroom. And there's often like limitations described by teachers and school administrators. There's often a lack of knowledge, a need for professional development, but there's not enough time to think beyond the curriculum. And he also is researching cultural paradigms hindering both art education and education for sustainable development, consumer culture and our understanding of freedom, quantitative focus versus like qualitative, so quantity focusing on like the numbers versus quality, like what is the actual experience of the students are having. Transversal short-term goals. Let me see. Okay, I think I want to pause here because I want to give us a little time. Um, and yeah, okay, I'm going to come back to this in our third session. Um, okay, a couple of quick things. So there is a homework assignment. It's very simple and fun. And I'm going to show you how to access it. Okay, so here is our Google Doc. Does anybody have any questions about the Google Doc, by the way?
I do actually. When I tried to go into the intro to art and sustainability in the top one,
Yeah.
and it's asking me for a password.
Yeah, so that's right here.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No,
Doing
you're great. No, it's a great question. I'm glad
sorry.
you asked. Yeah, absolutely. Okay.
Yeah, don't
Yeah.
have access to Google Doc.
You don't have access to Google Doc? Is that what you
Mm,
said?
Yes, I haven't seen the link.
Oh,
Did
let
you?
me throw it in the chat just so we can check real time if you're able to get in there.
Mhm.
Where's my chat? Here we go. Okay, Nina, let me know if that works for you.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah.
And then quickly,
Yeah.
can you say how to get to that section where it had all of the articles and things?
Yes, yes. So under reading, so here's
Yeah,
like our reading column.
yeah.
And there are a couple suggested readings that I have. Here's the documentary that I mentioned.
Oh,
But the extended readings are
okay,
here.
there.
Yeah,
Okay.
and that's the folder of folders.
Yeah, that's what okay, thank you.
If you guys have anything you want to add to this, that would be wonderful. Please do. Also within this, I was going to point this out next class, but there is this folder of folders on eco art resources specifically. So looking at different types of practices. I think the photography one I did update somewhat recently. Yeah, okay. So homework, the invitation is to uh, contribute. So scrolling down a bit, here's our art share. Dun, dun, dun. So you'll put your name if you want to share your email and your website or your Instagram or what, somewhere that we can find your work digitally. And if you don't have that, that's okay. But my ask is for everyone to add theirs in here by let's say this coming Tuesday, if possible. And then uh, the ask is for everyone to take a peek at each other's practice so that we know who is in our community. Like who are we in dialogue with? I have had instances in the past where students collaborate with each other for their project, which has been really cool. So yeah, please do check out each other's practices. And the second invitation for study is to contribute to the Artivist slideshow. We're like archivists, but we're artivists. And so in this slideshow, there's one example here. Uh, so the invitation is to share two artists, educators, processes, theorists, or works of art relating to art and sustainability. So here's an example. Susan Snipes, she shared this artist and this project that this person, John Sabra, is doing where he's turning acid mine drainage into non-toxic pigments. Because I think this is just a great way for us to pull some collective knowledge into this space. I will say that we have so many things to cover and two guest artists, which I'm really excited about in the next two classes. So there's a slim chance that we might not be able to get through everybody's presentation. But I think regardless, it would be really great to have so everybody can access and look at it. Um, and so you guys can access that in the Google Doc. So please bookmark this Google Doc because it's sort of like, I think of it as our hive for the class, where you can access everything. I'm also going to put the recordings, class recordings here within usually 24 hours of the end of class. And
Anna, may I ask a question?
yeah, please.
For the Artivist slideshow, do you want just one slide per artist with like links or and things like that?
I don't have a preference. It's entirely up to you. I
Okay.
would say just try to keep it under like 5 slides.
Okay.
Cool. Any other questions?
I think, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
I understand where to put the other artist's work. I think I missed where we put our own work.
Oh yeah. So scrolling down here, here's the art share.
Down. Okay, art
Yeah.
share. Sorry.
Yeah. No,
Got it.
you're so good. And lastly, last homework item is to look up Koyo's work, who is going to be our guest speaker next class. And then same to check out Nicole Dextrous before the third session. And their websites are in here. Any other questions? Okay, I'm gonna try to put you guys in 2, 4, 6, 8, perfect breakout rooms. I'm gonna assign them randomly. to have you, I wonder if this will,
Can I say one thing before you do that? I
yeah,
put it
please.
in the chat in case you
Hmm.
didn't see. I this call, you all might have seen it because I think it did go out to the Eco Art Space membership, but it's a sonic tree portrait collective website, and so some of you might be interested in participating. It's an open call and it has different deadlines, but I thought I might do that as part of my work in this class. And
Awesome.
it's a really cool for those of you who might like sound or to experiment with sound, but also with photography. And it there's also a research component. So you have to research your tree that you're doing a portrait of, which I love because I have these
Mm.
beautiful live oaks in my southern live oaks in my backyard. So anyway, if you're so inspired, the link is there.
Thank you, Colette. That's great. Can you also put that in your art share area, just so that that link is accessible there too? Um, okay, one second. I'm going to assign the rooms now. Uh, Let me just make sure. I haven't done this too many times. Sorry. One second. So I want you guys just to exchange contact info. Maybe say a quick hello. We'll just do this meet for like 3 to 4 minutes. Just touch base, exchange contact info, and we'll talk more about you guys meeting up at some point before we share our projects in like a month and a half. Okay. Oh. Erica, are you? Oh, yeah, you're invited to join room 2. Great. think we have one more group coming back and then we'll close out. Does anybody have any questions or anything they want to share in the meantime?
Well, thank you for such a good start. It's a lot of great information.
Thank
Yeah.
you. Glad that it's meeting you well.
Very much. I was telling Anna I was stressed because I have this festival tomorrow
Yeah.
and I'm in the middle of hanging, but then, wow, the topics were so relevant. So it actually fed my brain for tomorrow.
Yes,
That's so good.
awesome. That's great. That's so great. Well, I'm really excited to have met you all, and I can't wait for next week. Hopefully, we'll have a couple others joining us, and yeah, I'll see you then. Have a great week in the meantime.
Thank you, Anna.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye,
Bye,
everybody.
Bye.
everyone. Bye.